Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Hannah Sun, and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at TestRail. I'm really excited to be the moderator for today's panel discussion. So welcome to the webinar, Tester Talks, Insights from the 2022 Software Testing and Quality Report. Just wanted to touch a little bit on the report itself, just to give you a little bit of background. We invited TestRail users and the broader testing community to answer an in-depth survey about perspectives on key QA and testing trends. And 2022 is actually the fourth year that we ran this survey. Actually, over the last 4 years, we've received more than 15,000 responses to our annual surveys from over 30 industries and 100 countries. And from that, we've gathered enough data and insights to be able to launch our inaugural software testing and quality report this year. So that's what we're going to be digging into today during our panel discussion. So welcome. And before we start, just a couple housekeeping items. We are planning on a 1-hour webinar today. The webinar is being recorded, so we're going to make sure to send a recorded version of this webinar within the next 48 hours. So I'm really excited to get to talk to some folks today who are in the software testing and QA world, who are actually not just talking the talk, but walking the walk every day. It's going to be really fun. So without further ado, I want to give a quick introduction to our panelists. Hello, panelists. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. It'd be awesome if you could each give us maybe a short introduction, name, role here at TestRail, and how long you've been a professional involved in QA and testing. So with that, let's get started with, we'll do alphabetical. So we'll go Diogo.
Okay, so hello everyone. So I'm a solution architect and testing advocate here at TestRail. I've been in testing for around 9 years now, and my previous role before joining TestRail was as a test automation team lead. So yeah, that's kind of my field, but I like everything related to testing and software testing.
Awesome. Shanu?
Hello everyone, I'm Shanu, community manager at TestRail, and I joined TestRail in around I think February 2020, and I have around 9+ years of experience in software testing, and yeah, happy to have you all here today.
And then Simon.
I am Simon Knight. I am the lead product manager here at TestRail. I have been working with TestRail as the product manager for 5 years or so now, and for a little bit prior to that, working on content and some other things. I have been working in the testing field for longer than I really care to admit to be honest, certainly in some capacity or another for the last 15 years or so. So a decent amount of experience in the testing industry, both in terms of hands-on testing and I guess subject matter expertise over the last few years.
Awesome. It's great to have such a diverse set of experiences in testing here. Really excited to get to dig into some of your unique points of view on testing and QA in 2022. So with that background and understanding of where everyone is coming from, let's jump into some more pointed questions, conversations. So the first question today is based off of the report, and in 2022 in the 2022 software testing and quality reports, when participants were asked about which development methodologies or techniques they currently use, the vast majority of respondents, around 81% of them, said that they use Agile. As we know, the Agile methodology has transformed the software development process and appears to be the main development methodology used in the market today. So that being said, Agile is so closely tied to DevOps And you can see 45% of respondents identified using DevOps. So especially when combined with Agile, DevOps promises to promote the overall goals of Agile culture and delivering high quality software applications. So my question to you panelists is, where do testing and QA fit within the Agile and DevOps methodologies? And then we can start with Diogo.
Okay, so, well, I think testing actually fits everywhere. We don't even need to be talking about the methodology or anything, even in our lives. But first things first, so Agile is more of an idea. It sets a couple of principles with the goal of allowing teams to adapt to change. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about Scrum, because Scrum is a framework. It's a little bit more concrete stuff to talk about. For instance, in Scrum, testing can fit in things such as the concepts of the definition of ready, the definition of done, because you would like to probably shift your testing a little to the left and test your requirements, add those tests, the testing of the actual requirements to the definition of ready, and then you can also move a little further down the process. And on the definition of done, there is, well, there must be always something about testing, whether it's executing your regression, smoke tests, predefined test cases. It can also include exploratory testing, some other types of testing, even automated testing. So yeah, it's bound to be present on this sort of frameworks and methodologies. And then we also have DevOps. So DevOps is more of a culture that sets a couple of practices that allows to break the silo between development and operations. So what this means is that there's usually one team that does the full cycles from development up to deployment, monitoring, supporting, etc. And this is the perfect example of where we can use a continuous testing technique. So you can test both from the left or on the right. So you can shift left and do like on Scrum and test your requirements, etc. You can shift a little bit more to the middle and do the usual testing, what we regularly do, most of the testers regularly do. And then you can also move a little more to the right and do things like monitoring, analyze your logs, do some A/B testing, provide support to the customer, know a little more about the business. So yeah, testing is basically everywhere. That's my interpretation here.
I like that. Thank you for the awesome opening line, testing and closing line, testing fits everywhere. Shanu, where do testing and QA fit within the Agile and DevOps methodologies to you?
I just agree with whatever Diogo just said. And for me, I think before Agile and DevOps also, QA and testing was a very important part of software development lifecycle. But with Agile and DevOps, we have seen that the significance of QA has increased many folds because in this scenario of Agile and DevOps, where continuous collaboration, where we work on this continuous collaboration models and continuous development, there is a need of continuous improvement as well. So I think we must have seen and observed and experienced in our our testing teams that now QA teams, QA processes are introduced at the very early stages only because there's a need. The time to market has reduced and we have to be on top of everything, and suddenly the quality aspect of the application has become very important for all the stakeholders. So I think with all that in place, we have seen that I have seen personally in the organizations I've worked at, QA team is being involved at the discussion, at the very early discussion, and even scenarios, test scenarios which they design, they are aligned with the DevOps and processes. So with all this, I think QA is a very integral part of Agile and DevOps. And without a solid QA strategy and practices in place, it's nearly impossible to deliver continuous value. That's all. Yeah, I would like to add.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that thoughtful answer. Simon?
I really liked Diogo's closing statement as well. You know, testing fits in everywhere. It called to mind, I think, the famous sort of infinity diagram that you see used quite a lot in relation to DevOps. I think Dan Ashby probably created the original version of that, but it's used more or less synonymously with DevOps and testing. And yeah, I mean, my personal stance is that testing is pervasive throughout that entire cycle. And I mean, really, I think that in Agile and DevOps methodologies, testing fits in where it always has done. It's kind of in the same way that DevOps is a set of practices that engineers use to try and shorten the software delivery life cycle, ultimately with a view towards delivering high quality code continuously. Testing is the set of practices which aims to ensure the right thing is being built and that it's being built in the right way. And, you know, as such, complements that set of DevOps practices in, you know, a very good way. I think in an ideal world, all of the testing that can and that should be automated has been. You know, I think there's obviously a need for that as software development life cycles are compressed and people are seeking to get their code out faster and faster. You know, ideally, all of that stuff is being controlled and made visible some way to people that need access to that information. Often it's via a CI pipeline, but I think it's really helpful when you're testing metrics, often your testing results, but you know, people want a place where they can put all of their testing information as well, their ideas, the things that they want to test, the units of work for that testing, their test cases, for want of another word, and those things are ideally being made visible, aggregated and shared in a tool like TestRail. I think developers are best positioned to develop the vast majority of the test automation code. Ideally, they should be doing that in the same stack as the product that they're building, probably in the same repository as well. And you know, to that extent, to the extent at least that developers are writing the vast majority of the automation code, then that puts testers in a kind of quality consultant role. I like the QA as question asker acronym. And I think testers are well positioned to be focusing on the bigger picture of business objectives and risks. So, you know, kind of going back to what I started with, focusing on making sure that the right thing is being built and that it's being built in the right way. Just to kind of finish off my segment, one of my favorite recent quotes from the Eurostar conference, which the TestRail team was present at, was Michael Bolton saying that if we're doing end-to-end testing, but forgetting about the humans on either end of that testing, then we're not doing it right. And I think that's the superpower of testers, is staying focused on the human elements, staying focused on the business elements, and staying focused on risk.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I couldn't have said it better. And actually, I got a double thank you because you set us up for an awesome transition to my next question. So the rise of software development methodologies that require continuous workflows, such as Agile and DevOps, have pushed teams to automate as much as possible. And that doesn't appear to be changing anytime soon. But what does that mean for manual testing? And what do you all think is manual testing's place in QA? I'll shoot it back to you, Simon, and we'll work back around.
Okay, I mean, I think manual testing always has a place. I mean, you know, everybody tests, developers test while they're coding. They want to make sure that their code's working. Business analysts test, they test their ideas, they test their hypotheses in various ways, as do product managers like myself. You know, so everybody's testing throughout everything that they're doing. And a lot of that testing is, again, for want of a better word, manual, right? It's not automated, it's not being carried out by a machine. So, you know, testing always has a place. That place is not always with a dedicated tester, though. It's not, you know, it's not always with somebody who might class themselves as a professional tester or have the tester title. I think in the Agile and DevOps world, testing is democratized to the entire team, and that's as it should be. However, that challenges professional testers to expand upon their existing skill set. And, you know, if those testers don't have the ability or want to be able to automate their testing, and, you know, there's plenty of good reasons for not wanting to do that. Coding isn't everybody's cup of tea. There's plenty of other avenues that they can pursue instead, so that they're evolving alongside the methodologies their teams are using. I think skilled testers should definitely recognize that manual testing doesn't scale very well, so they should learn to leverage other opportunities. Instead, I already mentioned QA as question asker. Certainly over the course of my career, I have become very good at asking probing questions, and that's a skill that translates to, you know, lots of different areas. I think I'll leave it there and hand over to somebody else.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for your take on that question. And speaking about asking probing questions, Shanu, what is manual testing? What does that mean for manual testing to you, or what do you think is manual testing's place in QA?
I think, honestly, Hannah, this is one of the most debatable topic in software testing. There are a lot of biases around this topic about the place of manual testing and testers in today's world, and there are a lot of not so positive perceptions also about non-technical testers. But from my experience and what Simon just mentioned, that there's a need to upskill or enrich the current skill set or the toolkit we have, to become more tech savvy, to become more efficient in our testing process. And now the QA engineers have to be, involved in all the aspects of testing or quality, like they have to think from a 360-degree viewpoint, like for functional, performance, security, all different types of testing. So, it's important to have these type of skill set, But again, there is a section of people who again, is against that generalist mindset, and they want to, support more niche skills like, testers having something, more or in-depth skills about some particular testing type. What I want to say is it's finding the right balance, is the key. I think manual plus some usage of tools to become more efficient. And yeah, I think to conclude what I think about this is um, manual testing is not dead yet. I mean, it's human-centric. We will need the experience to carry out different types of testing like usability, user experience, exploratory. But there's definitely a change, and manual testing does not exist now in its traditional fashion anymore. Yeah, that's my take on this one.
Yeah, and Diego, what do you think is maybe replacing?
So yeah, about this, like Shanu and Simon very well said, I think this is about increasing and widening the skill set of testers. This is a solution for the problem that people speak about of, hey, if we automate so much, then what are we going to do with manual testing? Well, I've been automating for 9 years now, and the manual testers are here and they'll be here for a long while. So I don't think that should be a problem. And whenever I'm usually very connected to the I've been very connected to the QA leadership on the companies I work for. And every time someone said like, hey, but we don't have anything to test right now. I don't have anything to do. Usually the problem there is the lack of vision. It's not that things are like fully automated or anything like that. It's more that people aren't taking the opportunity that automation is giving them so much time that they could be using either to learn, either to do those accessibility tests that sometimes are talked about, but then no one ends up doing it anytime soon, or performance testing. I mean, there's just so much to invest other than manual or even automated testing. That I think this is almost a non-question, even though it's raised again and again, and I've seen it being raised like throughout the years, times and times over. But yeah, from my perspective, there's a lot to do, and there's also that sort of position. I think Simon, a quality coach. It's someone who has a global vision of things and who can try to improve whether it's processes, create some gates so that things don't slip on their quality. I mean, there's just so much to do here, so much work to do, and Shanu and Simon already mentioned a lot of things. So yeah, I'll cut it short here.
Yeah, and I have to thank you guys. You guys keep giving me the best transitions into the next question. Thank you for all your answers and making my job easy here today. So the next question is, the market is big and enterprises are getting on the automation rails, but many of them aren't able to fully enjoy the benefits of it and even fail without properly tackling some of the top challenges in automated testing. From the data shown here on this slide, the most common challenge that teams are facing is developing automated tests, with 45% of respondents choosing this as a top challenge. So based on this response and your own experiences and backgrounds, I'm curious to hear what each of you guys would share as your top maybe 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would share with the QA team that wanted to improve their test automation. Let's start with Shanu for this round.
Sure. I think I'm not an automation expert here, but I have some experience in automation. I mean, a few years back, when I started, I think first thing, I mean, we have heard and we have read this so many times that not everything should be or can be automated. Sometimes it's not just, it's not a wise decision to automate, because we need to have a clear understanding of that. I mean, most of us already know about this what can be automated and when to automate. Also, when I started, I really started on my own, and I juggled a lot, finding right resources. I'm talking about 2012, I think. Yeah, so I think having an experienced automation engineer personnel really helps, because in setting the direction or strategy to kick off the project, or setting some best practices. So obviously we can start on our own, but if when time is a constant, we need to think about that, and it really helps to have some person with that knowledge in the team to improve the process. Secondly, I observe that domain knowledge is very important to create scenarios sometimes, because no matter how good you are at automation, if you are missing out on particular domain specific scenarios, it won't be worth your effort. So I think that is second advice I would say from my experience. And the third thing is, I have observed that when we start automation, we want to achieve everything, and it's like having a clear and bigger picture in mind is very important, because when we are building module by module by module, and we need to have a very strong architecture so that it's easily scalable when the time comes. So I think, yeah, these advices I would give to my younger self when I started working in automation.
Yeah, so I heard don't boil the ocean. I heard make sure you're asking for help and getting that communication that you need, and build that support infrastructure that's going to support you down the road.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Diogo, do you have any pieces of advice or wisdom that you could share with the QA team that wanted to improve their test automation?
Sure, I do, Hannah. So, well, my biggest piece of advice would be to plan and create a strategy before anything else. I mean, from my experience, what I've been seeing over and over is that people will face exactly the same problems when they are automating tests that they're already facing when they are executing tests manually, either because their application is not testable, because they don't have the right data, because they don't have the right environment. And these are things that should be tackled before actually grabbing a tool and starting to automate your tests. Of course, there will be technical difficulties, flakiness, and all that we all know about, but that's not something that we can solve by just talking. I mean, that's more technical. It has to be seen like case by case. So I thought this would be a good advice. So plan ahead, make sure you have all your data set, make sure you have your environments ready, make sure you have everything. If you were to test manually, that you could do everything you want to do automatically, because automation makes it easier on some things, others not so much. But at least from a technical perspective, it will allow you to do more stuff than you do manually, and it will allow you to automate even not just a test, but the setup of the data, setup of some configurations on your environment, things like that. That should also be thought, not just like, oh, I'm going to do this request, or I'm going to do that click here and there, because you may do that, but if you mess up your data, if you mess up some other stuff, then you'll run into trouble. I've seen a lot of times where people do their tests in this particular environment with this particular data set, and then someone goes there and messes their data set, and suddenly it's like hell. It's all tests start failing. It's maintenance, test maintenance hell, and sometimes that even leads to abandoning automation. I've seen that before. And then another advice I would give is make sure there is good visibility into your test results. If your test results are kept into a silo, if no one has access to them, then it's like your automated tests don't exist. And if they don't exist, people won't credit you for automation. There won't be further investment on automation. There's a lot of things that come from there, and not positive things at all. I mean, I can tell a sort of a personal story that sort of relates to this. There was this one project where I was the only person there automating tests, and I was sharing the results only with my product owner. And she was actually praising me. Oh, thanks, Theo. This is amazing, and you're cutting time here and all that. But then at the end of the semester, I got my worst grade ever because I wasn't actually surfacing the results to the rest of the company and to management. So they thought, wow, this guy isn't doing his job. So yeah, that's an important thing to do. And you can do that putting them on display on your CI tool, on your test management tool, TestRail here, or on a dashboard elsewhere. So yeah, there's plenty of ways to do it, but please do it. So yeah, those would be my 2 pieces of advice.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that great wisdom and anecdote. Simon, last but not least.
Yeah, I mean, much like Shanu, I'm not a test automation professional. So I have some experiences of using and implementing automated tests on projects that I've worked on in the past. You know, much like Diogo has said, I've had good and bad experiences on some of those projects. I've certainly worked on projects where we've come pretty close to abandoning a test automation framework on occasion, because you know it can be really challenging, I think, to get that stuff right. And there's no sort of silver bullet. I don't think. A lot of it depends on the context in which you're working, what you're trying to build. I suppose by way of observation, before I get into my top 2 or 3 pieces of advice that I'm probably not qualified to give in any event, I think it's really important to stay focused on what the objectives are for actually introducing and building out your test automation in the first place. I think most teams want test automation in place so that they've got increased confidence in what it is that they're actually about to release, so that they're able to make a decision relating to whether or not to release a piece of code or a piece of architecture or whatever it is into their production environment. So one of the key goals of your test automation strategy, to my mind, should be to provide the necessary level of information to the right people at the right time. And for people like myself in a sort of product role, a simple red or green is often sufficient. I just want to know, are we ready to release yet or not? I don't necessarily want to dig into the details of what exactly is going on or what's failed and where. I just want to know, are we ready to go? So staying focused on those kind of objectives is really helpful, I think, and can help to steer your test automation strategy in the appropriate direction. That being said, I think it's important to try and have the developers write as much of the test automation as possible, and to try and keep that test automation in the same repository as the product code or the solution that they're working on. I've been following the chat as that's been going on, and I know probably a lot of you don't agree with that statement, but I think it helps towards keeping that test automation code well written and fast, because want feedback. So they're best placed, I think, quite often to write the kind of automated test code that's going to give them that feedback quickly. I think prioritizing your test automation so that it's focused on what's important at the various stages of your test and release process is super important. I reviewed some automated tests quite recently, and and was, horrified to discover that a lot of it, really wasn't focused on areas that were important to the business, or that was addressing, risks in the way that I thought it should be. So, I think, making sure that your tests are prioritized appropriately, and targeting the right areas, the areas that are important to your business, is super important. And to that end, if you're ever in doubt as to where to start with your test automation, take a risk-based approach. Don't focus on requirements coverage or something like that. Focus on risks, and start off by having by building out your test automation focused on the highest areas of risk, because that's probably going to help towards some of these problems on this chart that Hannah is displaying here, in terms of addressing issues in production and stuff like that.
Thank you, guys. These are some awesome tips. Hopefully these tips can help others get the most value from their automated testing process, and maybe even help avoid certain pitfalls when automating tests. So moving on to the next question, as you can see here, when participants were asked about the primary objectives for their team's software development and QA, the top 3 responses that were selected were tied directly to quality, namely increasing test coverage, reducing bugs in production, and automating more tests. So that being said, do you agree with the findings of this report? What are the 2 to 3 primary objectives that you consider when designing your QA strategy? And this time we'll start with Simon.
So what's the question again? What primary objectives you take into consideration when designing your QA strategy? So I mean, I'm just looking at the top response here. Increasing test coverage is being called out as one of the most important things to teams or individuals that responded to this survey. And I think I'd probably caveat increasing test coverage with in the right places, as I mentioned previously. There's not an awful lot of point increasing test coverage if it's not addressing the right things, if it's not focused on the right risks, or if it's covering things that aren't necessarily important to the business or the other members of your team. So I mentioned that I reviewed some test coverage recently, and on other projects that I've worked on, and have often been a little bit disappointed to find that the tests cover a lot of things, but not necessarily the right things. So sometimes it can make sense to reduce the overall test coverage a little bit, so that your team is better positioned to be able to maintain that reduced suite of tests and execute them faster, more frequently, and more reliably. I think in terms of my personal sort of top 3 primary objectives when I'm designing a QA strategy, and I guess this kind of assumes that I'm doing that from scratch, and I'm not reviewing or changing an existing QA strategy. Focusing on risk, as I've already mentioned a number of times already. Design tests to address risks, prioritize those risks, focus on coverage of risks rather than requirements and things like that potentially, and you'll probably address the bugs in production point here as well. automate tests. If you have an automated test strategy, then try to automate those tests at the lowest level possible that makes sense in the context of whatever it is that you're doing. I've mentioned a few times already that having developers write a lot of those tests is useful. I think somebody asked in the chat whether that means unit tests, and I think a lot of the time it can mean unit tests, but there's nothing to prevent developers from writing automation code for other types of tests as well, integration tests, smoke tests, things like that. I've worked on plenty of agile teams in the past where I have sat directly with developers and helped to steer the development of test automation, not only at the unit level, but at other levels of automation as well. API layer testing as well. Those are certainly things that developers can support. And I think I sort of started out by talking about democratizing the testing somewhat, that everybody owns quality on an agile or a scrum team. For example, the tester is not the sole person who is responsible for the quality of a finished product. They're not the gatekeeper, although sometimes it's useful to have a gatekeeper mentality and to think about introducing quality gates and things like that. Just because you're doing those things as a tester doesn't make you the person who is solely responsible for those things. In my view, it's the tester's primary responsibility to make sure that all of the necessary testing is being performed, not necessarily to do all of that testing themselves or to be solely responsible for it. And the QA strategy should make that clear, I think.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Simon. Moving on to Shanu. Shanu, what are the top 2 or 3 primary objectives that you consider when designing your QA strategy?
I think I just want to take one step backwards. First, to have a clear set of goals is very important. I have worked in all the organizations I have worked, for. So they all had a different definition for quality. So I think it mainly depends on the organization culture and sometimes the processes at the team level and project level. And those things, that culture really, influence the QA strategy sometimes. And once we have that in place, and then we can actually work for the objectives we want to achieve for our project. And I completely agree with the first 3 listed down here. And as mentioned, as Simon already mentioned, that the first objective is increase the test coverage at the right places. I mean, it matters. Otherwise, again, the effort won't reap those results which we are expecting. And also having objectives is not enough. I mean, just having objectives. We need to think a little more about how we will be able to achieve that. And I think a well-documented, a thought strategy or the process to achieve these objectives. If I take an example of reduce bugs in production. So for one of the organization I've worked with, for them, QA misses was an important KPI to test the quality of the application under test. For others, defect detection efficiency was an important KPI. So we need to be very clear about the what KPIs we will be using to measure these objectives and to know whether we are progressing towards them or away from them. So I think having all and the automate more test, again, automate when necessary, not everything. Sometimes the ROI from automation is very low, and we don't really need to automate, for simpler applications where, so I mean, a lot of things, if we document it properly, if we structure it properly, I think then yeah, I would go with the first three objectives.
Great, thank you for that answer. And last but not least, Diogo.
So this is a tricky one for me looking at this graph, because I see some of these as objectives, while others, I see them more as means to attain an objective. So for instance, to reduce bugs in production, I would probably like to increase my test coverage and automate more tests, things like that. So I'm taking this sort of approach. So yeah, one of the objectives that I think everyone should take into consideration is actually reducing bugs in production. That's sort of like the holy grail. We know that it's virtually impossible to have no bugs, but if we have less bugs, then the software is more reliable, etc. But even so, it's like Shanu and Simon mentioned. For once, it depends on the type of business you work in. So if it's something like life or safety critical, then you should probably be very focused on increasing your test coverage, on covering every scenario, on having a really low rate of bugs on your production environment. If it's not such a critical environment, then perhaps increasing the coverage and all that could be like, it could bring more effort than return. So you should probably consider that. And it's not just about reducing bugs in production. I mean, like Simon already mentioned a lot today, it's about the product also being fit for purpose. So you can have no bugs, virtually no bugs in production, but then if the product isn't fit for purpose, if people don't like using your product, or the product doesn't do what it should do, then it's no use having no bugs in production, because people won't use it. It's useless. But yeah, I believe that that's a good metric, the bugs in production one. And then I would probably go for a second objective to make testing more efficient, or shorten the time for new releases, which is can be type one to another. If you make testing more efficient, then you have shorter release cycles. And yeah, to do that, once again, you can automate more tests. You can, there's a couple of hints there, like automate more tests, implement continuous integration or continuous deployment models, shift left, because shift left is also about having faster feedback, about failing fast, fixing things sooner, and then being able to go through the rest of the phases that are usually more costly to then go back to the first phase, and then going back and forth through those phases. So there's a couple of things you can do to actually be more efficient in testing and in development overall, in the development life cycle overall. So yeah, I would go for testing more efficiently and reducing bugs in production. That's my take on this.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Diogo. So that was actually the last question for today. So Diogo, Shanu, Simon, thank you again so much for answering all the questions and for that great discussion. Such a pleasure to chat with you three today.